from the Mercy One studio.
Welcome, folks, to The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Every week, diving deep into the truth of Catholic social teaching and restoring all things in Christ.
The Uncommon Good is on the air. I'm Bo Bonner.
I'm Dr. Bud Marr.
We're coming to you live from these United States of America. I am here in Des Moines, Iowa, where I'm the Executive Vice President of the Newman Idea and Director of Mission and Ministry at Mercy College of Health Sciences. You can find us at newmanidea.org and mchs.edu. Bud, out in Pittsburgh. Bud, what are you up to in the land of pits and bridges?
Here I'm directing the National Institute for Newman Studies, and you can find more about that at newmanstudies.org.
But it's a new year. I'm not the type to make resolutions. I think John Leonetti has a whole post up on Facebook about how he is. And I know that because we're both friends with him, he tries to rope us into New Year's resolutions. Were you roped into any by him, or do you have your own?
Not a big New Year's resolution guy. I probably should be, but no, I'm more of doesn't the tortoise win the race in the end?
That's right. Now there's because slow and steady, but I like the idea that where you're getting at that maybe it's because he slept more or something like that.
Well, yeah. So you're not going to be one of these Exodus 90 guys where you're taking cold showers for the next 90 days?
No. We almost got to have to do Exodus 90 on our own without any choice because our water heater had to get repaired. But luckily that was pretty quick, and accidental Exodus 90 was avoided. But no, what I have really done is made sure to celebrate until January 6th and eat like total trash that entire time. Now that Three Kings Day has gone past, I'm not going on to a Lenten diet by any means, but I am trying to, eat not only things that will kill me. So that's been really nice to eat foods that were a plant at one time. That's always a good thing to do.
Yeah, my epiphany was pretty awesome this year because the priest at church, they took the blessing of the water and the salt that's normally reserved for, I think, Vespers at Epiphany, and they prayed those after Mass, and it's a pretty amazing rite to observe, so that was cool for me.
So the other thing, though, with Three Kings Day happening on Monday, I know that people mostly celebrate it on Sunday, but January 6th is when the Epiphany is. That was also the epiphany of a new semester beginning at Mercy College of Health Science, so mchs.edu. Mercy College underwrites our show, and we thank them for doing that. A new semester underway. Bud, are you teaching anything in the new semester?
Yeah, I'm doing another section of servant leadership. So excited about that, and I've got a pretty large group of students and trying to, cast a vision early in the semester for the service learning that they do as part of their time at Mercy.
Do you try to convince them that receiving their syllabus is kind of like getting gold, frankincense, and myrrh?
Yeah, they're unimpressed, but I do pitch it in those terms.
Well, like I said, mchs.edu, multiple start points in fall, spring, and summer. Accelerated courses, some of the coursework is completely online, and again, all you got to do is check it out at mchs.edu. But do you have any, grand stories of the break? Like I think Jimmy was talking to us. He almost forgot how to run our show because it's been a while. So is there anything either you forgot or any great... Jimmy confirmed he did forget. Or is there anything else that you want to make sure that the people know you got a chance to do over the break?
Well, Christmas now for us is pretty crazy because we take the whole fam back to Nebraska. So that's kind of involved. And it's always fun to bring 6 kids under the age of 12 on an airplane.
Right.
I feel like I might as well just be carrying like a hive of bees by the look on people's faces. But I think passengers on the planes end up being mostly pleasantly surprised by the way my children handle the whole thing.
That's because you make them sing like the Von Trapp children on the plane rides, and that impresses everyone.
It's basically Sound of Music from here to O'Hare.
Nice. Sorry, go ahead.
No, but Christmas itself is always a little bit hectic, but a lot of fun. And like at Rachel's parents' house, there are 8 adults and 11, 12 children, something like that. So it's like that first scene in Home Alone.
Right.
The pizza guy's waiting to be paid, and there's just like this steady stream of human beings that are passing by.
Did you have all your children with you, though? No one was left at Home Alone in Omaha, Nebraska?
That's what I threatened them with, but I never follow through on it. So they're all here in Pittsburgh.
Nice. Well, we ran through Kansas and got to see Robin's family, and then my parents came up actually for the New Year. And we are hitting that magical age where your children can play card games with you and you can kind of teach them to gamble. So it's a very important time in every Oklahoman's life. So my dad was teaching children how to play various card games. Mostly we settled on War, King's Corner, and 3 to 13. So it was sort of like Atlantic City up here in Des Moines, thanks to my parents, but that always means that it's a really there was no money exchange, just in case the SEC or FCC is listening, but maybe someday. So yeah, we're talking about needing a casino's license down on Kenyon Avenue. Any rate, so it's great to be back to the Uncommon Good. Today's guest is just Bud and I and you, gentle listener. We're going to talk about our patroness, St. Joan of Arc. If anybody's ever seen our symbol, we have a quote from her. So we're going to talk about her and what she means to the show. Nice to get back on track talking about why we have her as a patroness and what that means for our goals with the Uncommon Good. So this is the Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Stick around. We'll be back right after this. Back with the Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you this Wednesday. It's great to be back with you. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and Happy New Year. So, Bud, with the new year, it's always good to go back to the foundations, the roots, and decide what is it that, we don't have to make New Year's resolutions for the show because those will be recorded and then we'll be held to them. And we don't want to add anything like that to our radar. But it seems to me always important to go back and say, what is it about our show that we hope you, good listeners, and us, Bud, me together accomplished by prayerfully considering why have this show at all. So I like to go back and think of our patroness that we chose for the show. We don't necessarily always do a good job of making sure people know that. But if you go to, for instance, the iTunes and follow our podcast, or you look online, our little logo, which and I forget the gentleman who made it. He was a summer intern like 2 years ago. He was fantastic. He made this wonderful logo for us that has some French and some Latin on it, just to confuse people. One of them I think is pretty obvious. It says, St. Joan of Arc, pray for us. But the other is a quote from her in French that says, act and God will act. One of her famous pithy quotes about what compelled her to do what she did. So, St. Joan of Arc has always been the patroness of our show, and we wanted to maybe take time to re-dwell on why we thought that was the case. Why is it when we consider a show about the common good, are we going to choose a peasant medieval French girl who seemed to have some moderate military success but then was burnt at the stake? I'm not hoping that either of us has to, join an army or get burnt at the stake, Bud. But I think pretty quickly you and I both thought St. Joan of Arc would be a appropriate patroness for our show. You got any first opening thoughts about why that seemed so obvious to us?
I just have to say St. Joan of Arc has always amazed me. You think about, like you said, a peasant girl who maybe knew how to write her name and died at the age of 19, yet her legacy is just so expansive. The patroness of France, the patroness of this show. And
France, the Uncommon Good, kind of the same word.
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
So it really is, like, to me, Joan of Arc, we can get into her love of country and what she stood for more generally, but it's just, on the surface, really an amazing homage to the power of God's grace. Like, if you look at just the basic details of her life, you would think, like, how is this person still remembered. And there are thousands of people around the world each day who ask for her intercession based on like the length of her life, the level of her education, and all that.
So St. Joan of Arc was born in 1412 on the Feast of Epiphany, January 6th. I guess we're not dead sure, but that's what most sources report. So again, unlike maybe other French saints that we know of the time period that a lot of people know, St. Louis, for instance, the king, various other people, they're kings. They're people who are in universities. They're clerics with a lot of power. But truly, Joan was born in a time in a sort of faraway village tucked in the backwoods. And by anything that you would know from her growing up, it would seem that she wasn't destined for some sort of fame. But to show that God likes to use the lowly things of the world to shame the wise and high-bred and high-born, from an early age she started to have apparitions of St. Michael the Archangel and other people as well, but it seems like St. Michael the Archangel is one of the specific ones that would come and talk with her and taught her how to pray and things like this. This is all becomes important because people start to ask, well, maybe you're just making these things up. But she doesn't know how to read, like you said. She kind of learns to sign her name. She learns the basic stuff when it comes to the Our Father and things you need to know to confess. Has a great devotion to confession. But when she is later called on the quest that she's called to do, and then later is being interrogated about it, that precisely becomes the question: is where could she have got these ideas? It certainly seems to not be from her family or her parents, etc., etc. Now, famously, what's going on at this time is an unending war between English and the English and the French. A lot of this stems back from the days of the Norman conquest. You can get into a lot of dorky history about this, but in short, the English and the French fought for over 100 years, actually more like centuries, a sort of low-grade war back and forth. Mostly it dealt with northern France, maybe sometimes southern English countryside, but mostly northern France, and about who decided belonged where. They'd kind of have the nobles fight, and then they would kidnap one another, and then they'd ransom each other back, and they'd all stop for Christmas, and they'd all stop to make sure their crops are fine. And it kind of just went like this until at one point, and this is where Joan comes on the scene in the 15th century, the English make a big push into France, and they're really trying to take over the place this time, or so it seems, or at least an occupying force in a lot of northern France. And so Joan actually tries to go to the Dauphin Charles VII, who should be king but hasn't been crowned king and inaugurated yet, as it were, and says in a vision that she's seen that she's supposed to help lead his armies to victory so that he can be made king. And this, if you start talking about the odds of all of this happening, this is like, when the Cubs finally won the World Series, bud, or if Iowa State would ever win 10 wins or more. I mean, it was like nearly impossible. And so the idea is, at this point, the French are so desperate. This Maid of Orleans, the Maid, as she becomes known, at this point, it's almost like, fine, whatever, give it a shot. She actually, puts on armor, rides in front of people, and for the first time, I'm going to mess up where this was at. Where was the first battle at?
Are you thinking, was it Orleans?
Yeah, the Orleans. Yeah, so the first battle where they all think that they're doomed, with the Maid riding in front, the French actually make a stunning victory, push the English back almost with utter ease, and take over and win in a way they hadn't for months, if not years. And so the fame begins to spread, and town after town, with the Maid leading them, and her insistence about that they pray, that they go to confession, that they stop doing things that maybe soldiers in a countryside are known for doing, that they change their lives. All of this eventually even makes Charles VII a believer, and strikes fear into the English. And they take over enough of France that they make it to the throne where Charles VII can actually be made king. Now, unfortunately, this is where things go bad for Joan. Charles is made king and then basically kind of throws her to the side and forgets about her. She's eventually captured by the English. Charles, after all that she did for him and the sort of visions that God had of what she would do to help liberate France, he doesn't even send a ransom, casts her to the side. Eventually, the English try her not only for war or treason or anything like this, but for heresy, saying that since she received visions that were unapproved, that she was wrong. They also made a big deal about her wearing men's clothes to battle and said that this was tied with being prompted by demons to go against the natural order, things like this. And after, basically starving her, depriving her of sleep, she signs a renunciation of the visions that she has, but then quickly recants that and says that she's been tricked, then that she'll never she'll never sign anything to renounce them again. She's threatened with being burned at the stake. She calls their bluff. It isn't a bluff. They burn her at the stake, and she dies. But quickly, within the next 100 years, Rome itself retries the case, says not only was she tried unfairly, but that she died a martyr, forgiving her enemies, asking forgiveness for herself, and staying devoted to what the Lord had called her to do. So like you said, Bud, a life that burned brightly and quickly and tragically, but has lived on and has only grown every century since. So one more time, when you start to think about why is it that we have it for a show, it's not like she's an academic. It's not that she was known for spreading the gospel through her speech. But if we're talking about the common good, exactly Joan of Arc starts to hit at the crosshairs of what we mean to have the concerns of heaven and the concerns of earth wedded together, to see that it's impossible to bifurcate them and act like we can deal with our spiritual life on one sense and then the life in the world on the other. And it seems to me that St. Joan is the epitome of what it means to consider all of our actions as not only for the common good on earth, but the common good in heaven as well.
Now, you're obviously more up on the history than I am, and I'm curious when you were narrating those events, how did Charles VII come to believe that Joan should be sent into battle? Like, do you know any of the backstory about this young girl comes to him, and it would be very uncommon for someone like her to do the things that she did? I don't know. I guess just hearing the rough details, I'm surprised that Charles didn't send her immediately back home.
Well, the desperation of the French as part of that, and this is where we make jokes about never underestimate the desperation of the French. It shows up in many military escapades. But also there had been a prophecy, some had been kicking around, that France would be saved through a virgin, so it's sort of like a recapitulation of the Isaiac prophecy. But part of it was Jean won, she won the confidence of Charles VII by telling him a secret that only those two know and that was never reported and that we never heard what it was. But she was able to, so to speak, prophesy and tell him that, I don't know if Michael the Archangel or one of the other angels who talked to her said this, but one of her visions told her a secret about Charles VII's life that she alone could tell him, and that swayed him, plus desperation, to let her go see if truly she was the fulfillment of this prophecy, to go lead these troops into what seemed like sure defeat, and then it completely end up the other way.
Yeah, the other thing that comes to mind, I really like your thoughts about how Joan is this beautiful image of wedding concerns for the world with our heavenly calling, and that they can't be bifurcated. We could get into a lot of interesting stuff today. One question for me, when you think about this conflict between the English and the French at this time, it raises a lot of interesting questions. I can understand why Joan is a very inspiring figure, and just hearing you talk about her life, if there was a film released about Joan of Arc, I think I'd be prone to go see it just because it's kind of a cool story. Kind of like the geeky boy in me comes out just hearing here's this unassuming young lady who basically took it to the English or whatnot.
Right.
But at this time, this is very much pre the kind of serious divisions in the Christian West that we live in the midst now. And I guess, how do we think about a saint who loved her country, but the outworking of that was basically, I don't know, do you think it's a fair way to say it, like fighting other Catholic Christians?
Right. Now, this is a good point, but we have to make a side note real quick. Jimmy and I both made the face. There are actually several movies about Joan of Arc, but I will throw back out to Jimmy. Many of them are not good in any way. The sort of, yeah. Oh, there was a miniseries. Okay, so...
Yeah, the miniseries was okay. I'm thinking sort of like a Martin Scorsese, like
okay,
high level. No, I mean I can go back and find
instead
DVDs
of the Irishman, the French woman. Okay, I got it. No, we just wanted to make sure to give you a little grief. Yeah, no, obviously the black and white one with and I'm blanking on her name. I'm a bad person. The sort of standard 1920s silent film is considered one of the greats. It was about Joan of Arc. Any rate. Back to your much more serious point than me and Jimmy scoring pop culture points on you. This is exactly seems to be the crux of the issue. I know that that starts to be the question that the war between France and England, or even any of these medieval states, prompts is, how is it that people could believe in Christianity and then go to war with each other against other Christians, as you said? And part of this starts to be, well, the Middle Ages managed a lot better than we did. So, for instance, their understanding of just war and the peace of Christ is like they would have never attacked each other during Christmastide. They don't attack during Easter. They have these like small time periods in which they could go fight. They can't burn crops, etc., etc. So much so that that's why there were things like the 100 Years' War. It wasn't 100 years of total warfare. It was sort of 100 years of off and on scuffles. However, all that said, Christians figured out very easily an easy out in their hearts to be cruel to each other, and invented all sorts of horrible sort of reasonings in order to be at perpetual war with their Christian brothers across the continent. What starts to be striking about Joan is she didn't have some sort of vendetta against the English, and nor did she have some sort of nationalistic understanding of France. What she continually says is that the homeland of France, where churches are there, and that's where people say Mass, and that's where they are baptized and buried, this is where they grow their food, this is where they have their families, that the French have, so to speak, the right, I don't know if she'd use that word, the right to be able to live and flourish as a people of God, praising God. And the English have that as well. The problem is this occupational war, the occupying force in France, who's both disrupting the French and the English. One of the things that's really interesting with Joan is as she's going through, after the battles, she would go through the battlefield and openly weep for the dead, English and French alike. And one of the things she was trying to do before she was captured was raise money for chapels to be erected on the battlefields for the fallen of both the French and the English. And everywhere she went, she herself would go out and try to get the English to peacefully surrender and leave before the battle would ever start. And even with the sort of visions that she received about her role in helping to liberate France, there was always the tinge of the prophecy of martyrdom, that she would have to be willing to give up her own life in order for this sort of peace to be had. And so that's, like you said, gets to the heart of what would it mean to be a Christian soldier? What would it mean to enter into these conflicts? And if the idea is just to win or to seek revenge or take it to the opposing nation to show them that they were wrong, that they would be like warriors like anyone else. But Joan gets to the heart of the matter. It's not through our own strength and defenses that we're going to win victory or strike revenge, but relying on God using this humble instrument, this peasant girl who can't read and who never fought in her entire life, God using Joan to send back the oppressors so that the liberated people can now be liberated, not to do whatever they want, but to live a life with God. That is the heart of what just war in the sort of long tradition of the Catholic faith even means, the idea that the common good can be served but not through mere victory and not through the hands and prestige of men, but through the miracles of God and the people who rely on him.
Yeah, by way of confession, I can say on air that for me, thinking about all of these topics has been one of the more difficult sort of like theological questions that I've faced. In the Gospels, you have our Lord, of course, saying things like, turn the other cheek, and St. Paul says, do not repay evil with evil. And Christians have spilled a lot of ink and been in a lot of debates about how we actually concretely work that out. What I hear you saying, Bo, and I think this is really important, is that our commitment to Christ transforms even how we think about the most difficult facets of life, and war certainly fits under that umbrella. And I'll preface this next comment by saying I'm not in any way dismissing the sacrifices made by soldiers, but I heard an ethicist once say that today when we talk about dying for our country, sometimes it means nothing more than dying for names in a phone book. And what he meant by that is like we've sort of abstracted the questions of just war and just turned sort of like our fighting sometimes into fighting for an idea, where what I hear, and we can get into this a lot more in the second half of the show, with St. Joan of Arc, it was never simply about that. There was something very specific, like a love for specifically other people, for a land. And so these questions always took on very like fleshy content, even like the nuts and bolts of how you fight a battle and what you do after the battle were informed by her love for Christ.
No, I think that's a great way to segue into the next segment, so stick around and we'll get into precisely that issue about St. Joan of Arc's life and what it has to tell us about modern Christian living in that regard. This is The Uncommon Good. We'll be back right after this. Back with The Uncommon Good, Bo Bonner, Dr. Budmar, joining you on this beautiful Wednesday, considering St. Joan of Arc. St. Joan of Arc, patroness of our show, and how her example gives us a sort of example of what we want to do when we consider the common good, the intersection of both heaven and earth, both the concerns of our daily lives, whether they be political, family, or just life in the human family, but also the destiny towards the heavenly city and everything that has to do. So, Bud, we're still getting corrected by Jimmy about his pop culture knowledge and how much he knows better than us. Yes, Jimmy, Ingrid Bergman, thank you. Thank you for shaming us. No, I'm kidding. No, I'm kidding. I completely forgot, so thank you for pointing that out. It's a wonderful movie. Warning to everyone, though, it's a silent movie, so don't go there thinking that you're going to get dialogue that you're not going to get. But it's a beautiful movie.
Just for the historical record, I did know that there were films that had been done about some. Like, could I find a movie about Abraham Lincoln that's been made?
That's right. I do like the idea that like you've gone through life this far, dealing very much with theology, most of it, and being like, why hasn't anyone made these Joan of Arc movies? So sorry, it was giving us a little bit too much of a laugh.
Yeah, the way I phrased it was funny. I mean, I don't want to have to take a trip to the library and hunt down a DVD. So, and God knows, Netflix isn't putting out any movies about Joan of Arc.
That's right. You start taking pictures of yourself watching Joan of Arc, publishing it on Facebook. What? Oh, Facebook is making a Joan of Arc. Yeah, Netflix. Netflix is making a Joan of Arc movie, Bud, and I don't know what I think about that.
Yikes. Yeah, well.
Where have they ever messed up before except all the time?
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna have to talk to Martin Scorsese. This will be like I don't know though. Silence was kind of a mixed bag even, so.
That's right. I'm
not sure the most reliable filmmaker out there who can tackle it, and I don't think we want to farm it out to EWTN necessarily either.
No, it's true.
So.
When the most recent Joan of Arc movie that I can think of, whatever the actress's name is, I remember telling a group of students, I was like, yeah, the lady that was in The Fifth Element, and they didn't know who Joan of Arc or what The Fifth Element was, and so I felt very old, or very nerdy. So anyway,
Well, since you're in studio, like, can you get a gauge for me with Jimmy? Was the miniseries a thumbs up or thumb down?
it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
So
I remember being unimpressed, but I'd have to go back to it.
that's right. Well, we'll have to get in Steve Whitmer and see if he can go through every Joan of Arc movie. He is the Catholic movie guy, so we'll see what we can do about that.
That would be awesome.
So to get back to Joan of Arc herself and not movies made thereof, one of the interesting things so part of the basis of what Bud and I are using as a jumping off point to talk about her, our good friends over at Church Life Journal for Notre Dame, Anna Stell, who has written wonderful books. She has fantastic books about the Middle Ages, including the Eucharist. She has an essay on Joan of Arc, God, Country, and Joan of Arc, where we're kind of use that as a jumping off point to shake, rattle, and roll the old noggins to make us remember things about Joan of Arc and what to talk about. She has brought up that Simone Weil, another interesting French woman who you could have an entire show about the weird mystery of her life. Simone Weil found the example of Joan of Arc very powerful, but really decided that she was the prototype of answering how is one to love one's country. Now, it's one thing for us to say, how do you love one's country? How do you consider yourself a patriot and what that means? But it's incredibly interesting to think about this with Simone Weil, who is in exile in 1943, if I'm not mistaken. So this is in the middle of the world in World War II, after France has capitulated. And you start to ask yourself, what does it mean to love one's country? When that is an incredibly loaded question for the French. Do you capitulate with the occupying force because you love your country? Do you join the resistance? What do you do? And Simone Weil says the only answer really is to look at Joan, and what Joan did for her country is much different than what everybody else does. So Weil says, in June 1940, one saw how hideous and pitiful could be the spectacle of a people no longer attached by bonds of fidelity to anything whatsoever. They rolled over, is what she's saying. But the idea, of course, that Joan is not attached to a political party. She loves the king because the king is the representative of the land, but she was never involved in politics. She never had a chance. She wouldn't have been open to politics because of the lowness of her birth. But she loved the land that God had given her. She saw France, right, the eldest daughter of the Christian faith, under siege and unable to live out its vocation as a Christian nation. And so was willing to not only give up her life or give up the quietude of her home, she was willing to buck nearly all social conventions to live out the burning desire that God had put in her heart to serve Him through serving the people of her land. And so when you think about a French woman talking about this in 1940, that the only answer in the face of sort of Nazi occupying power is a sort of love and devotion like Joan of Arc, that starts to put the question for us, right? What does it mean for us to love our country in that way? Patriotism in 2020 usually gets coded as not only unwavering, but unquestioning loyalty to the nation state, to the government of the United States, or at least the concept, maybe the military of the United States. The word patriot comes from the Latin patria, right, where we get the idea of being patriotic, but that's where we get the idea of fatherland, right? The love of a father, to love the land of our fathers. But where we also get the idea, that's sort of the Latin version of the Greek word piety, where we show ourselves to have proper gratitude to the things that went before us. And Joan shows this kind of love for her land, for her people. And in the person of the king, her fathers, right, the people that came before and granted her this land, even if Charles VII himself shows himself personally not worthy of the fidelity and the piety she showed to him. And so, but the idea, right, doesn't have to be in order to show yourself a patriot, you must join the military, or you must go out in front of advancing armies for the sake of whatever country you belong to. But certainly that idea that I can only love where I'm from properly, loving it through God and what God wants to do with me for its benefit and its good, that's the heart of an actual patriotism, a patria, a love of the land of our fathers that Joan shows in a way that, not to be too rude about this, but like waving a flag, singing Toby Keith songs, as it were, doesn't appropriately show compared to what Joan is getting at.
That may be our first Toby Keith reference on air.
Well, and I want to point out, as he is a graduate of OU, it was a negative comment, so yes.
If you're playing Uncommon Good Bingo at home, mark that one down. Yeah. Bo, so when we think about patriotism, and I know St. Thomas Aquinas said it's one of the natural virtues, so it's not something to be taken lightly. One thing that I've always struggled with, to be honest, is when we think about countries, it seems to me there's a certain way where you could look at the earth from a bird's eye view and say, aren't sometimes these distinctions we draw sort of arbitrary? So if a Catholic is living along the Canadian border, what does it mean that if he's 2 miles south of a specific place, that now he's an American or a citizen of the United States, and then just right across the river, that person is a Canadian? And I guess this is a little bit of a devil's advocate thought process, but the second thing is is that way of thinking about the world even helpful in the sense so often our commitment to be to a country can be sort of like a divisive thing. So I don't know if you've ever thought through what does it mean that we have borders, and that means that we're then connected to nation states, and how that changes how we think about our vocation.
No, this is absolutely true, and part of this has to do with certainly absolute developments that have happened since the time Joan's running around, but Joan's also living through some of those developments. So on one hand, nation, the word that it used to mean, did not mean a border with a government and a military that constituted this land, right? The nation. Nation traditionally meant a people. So we'd talk about the nation of Israel. And we were talking about the nation of Israel long before they were ever in the Promised Land. The nation, the people of Israel, were the people of Israel enslaved in Egypt. They were the nation of Israel in the wilderness. They were the nation of Israel in exile in Babylonia and when the Assyrians. They were the nation of Israel when they returned. They will be the people, the nation of Israel at the end of time. And the same thing with the church. The church itself is a people, so there is a way to really talk about the nation of the church, especially of the saints in heaven. You hear heaven talked about a lot as a city, which makes a lot of sense, especially the sort of allegorical sense between, the Greek philosophers talking about cities, and polis means city, and so political means life in the city, etc. But it's also true to talk about the church militant, the church, the nation of the church. It's people, a host, and even as it were. And so this idea that there are a people and that they live somewhere. The idea, of course, is that it used to be porous, right? So that you can talk about the lands of the nation of the Comanches, for instance, in the United States, Comancheria, as they call that. But that would include lands that were western Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas into Colorado, New Mexico, and down into Mexico itself. But they didn't have residents there. They were nomadic people. They rode horses. But that was the nation of the Comanches, right, was in these lands, and you could find them at different times between then. And exactly, it's the modern world that starts to understand borders very differently because, like you said, now when taxation or now when representation or now when abstractions that we come up with, the border becomes everything rather than the sort of I wouldn't want to say rule of thumb, but sort of like the crossover point where two nations, right, this nation of people and this nation of people interact. Of course, when it comes to things like war and stuff like this, you can start to understand how making a border makes the centralized authority more and more powerful. But you see this in the time of France with Joan, right? The king, traditionally in the earliest parts of the Middle Ages, was seen as the head of a people's And that's why that was important. And so where a king's castle was important, because that was sort of like the hearth of a house, except situated in a grouping of land. And just like we now have ideas of like yards, my yard stops here, this is where my fence goes. People in a prior time had commons, right? So you'd have your house, right? And that's yours, and people shouldn't just waltz into your house. But the commons was the place where like everybody's sheep would graze, and that's where we'd all have picnics together. That would be what the town's business did together. And the border, right, starts to be more of a thing that is shared. And so like you said, right, like the more we abstract these ideas, the more it sounds like we're killing each other over abstractions, and that like literally living 10 miles north could make all the difference in the world. But this goes back to Veal's point. There aren't notions of what makes us a constitutive people. Nation as an idea of a people that is grouped together goes away, and we replace it with abstraction. So it starts to be hard to imagine that I'm going to go fight a war or even pay taxes for literally the millions of people in the United States, for instance, that maybe I don't share anything in common with. And I'm, again, like you said, more devil's advocate than anything like this. But you start getting huge groupings of people, and that becomes more and more difficult. If you have 300 million people, Bud, it starts to understand, it's harder a bit to understand it as a people. And I think that that's what you're precisely getting at, and that Joan herself and the armies that are fighting, they're in the sort of fulcrum of that great change, because, of course, a lot of the people in northern France who are English were Normans who had invaded England and were coming back. It gets a little bit more complicated that in the intervening years, but there's an open question about, how French are the English, how English are the northern French. What Joan seems to be arguing is, but we're a people here, and you destroy our crops, and you do terrible things to our women, and you take away people, and you kill the poor, and we can't worship our God. And if you're making it where we can't worship our God, you are intruders to our people who belong to God first, not even to this land and not to you. And I think that's what we start to talk about and have to wrestle with when we talk about patriotism, patria. What does it mean to have a fatherland? Well, it's less land, like you said, and more a people. And the question starts to be, who do we belong to? In America, I think up until recently, it would make more sense to talk about regions that then come together to become the United States. But even that, as you've probably pointed out, is starting to go away.
Yeah, I think hearing about Joan's story, to me, it reminds me of the fact that, well, I like how Catholicism forces us in some ways to face these issues head on, and it maybe unsettles like the easy answers that we're prone to give. And as you pointed out when you were talking about the biography of her life, like her answers were always, they weren't abstractions, and they always took into account her most foundational commitment as a Catholic and a follower of Jesus. And so when we do think about taking an action as serious as, using violence against another human being, like thinking about that in terms of how do I protect the innocent, that's different than just seeking revenge. And even as wars are being fought, if God forbid we're called to that sort of thing, as Catholic Christians, like the way that we think about the concrete actions of war is transformed. So, for instance, say a battle does break out, like we saw in World War II, where there are Catholics involved on both sides. Like, you can't think about the opponent simply as a monster that needs to be defeated, but as part of the body of Christ. This sort of thing, of course, informs even like conversations about immigration or whatnot. And so, I guess what I'm saying, Bo, is like to use sort of a lame phrase, like living in the tension. We have, on the one hand, our commitments to places, because those are inherently connected to relationships and to people. So you're an Okie, you're an American, and the fact that you're a Catholic doesn't do away with the sort of moral commitments that involves, but it might also involve a unique kind of witness that you wouldn't see from someone who's just who doesn't have that commitment to Christ as part of their worldview.
Yeah, I would say that, once again, right, the reality of the incarnation, we are body and spirit, right? We can be things that the world sees as paradoxical, but through Christ they can be united. So we are embodied, so we have to have a land, a place, a specific fleshiness that we have a devotion to. I am from this place. I live in this place with my body. These people are owed my obligations towards them. But then we're also spiritual, in which no fleshy reality can hold back. I am a Christian. I belong to the city of God. My spirit can't be contained by merely this land, this border, these people. But we have to hold both together, and exactly what the common good must be is seeing in each place to the best of our ability, making the incarnation and the fact and the reality of the incarnation real in whatever it is that we're doing, so that my devotion to the fleshy place that I am from and the spiritual reality of where I'm going do not ultimately oppose each other in the end, even if now I don't see exactly where that goes or how to exactly do that. And even when it seems like I'm doing something like compromising is the wrong word, but making the best decision out of bad ones, I must always keep that in mind and try to live that reality. And that comes down to, like you said, with just war theory, we make decisions like we are not going to view the people we are fighting as merely an enemy to be extinguished, but always, if we're doing self-defense, if we're never preemptive in a war, we're always defending someone, protecting the innocent, but that we're always aiming to cease violence as soon as we can. We can't make unconditional surrender a measure of war. We can't aim after civilians. There's the reasons that we would go to war, and there's the things that we would do in war that we must follow. This is the ancient just war doctrine of the Catholic Church, at least since St. Augustine. I think it has antecedents, predecessors to that. Thomas Aquinas, the School of Salamanca, and then finally, even if you go look in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, how it stands, right? The articles of why would we go to war and why we wouldn't in the first place, and how we would conduct war if we must, is always towards this idea that enemies can be reconciled in the end, that evil can be repelled and resisted, but doesn't need to be squashed into the ground, that we're doing this truly for the sake of peace, and as soon as we can, we would stop doing these things. And Joan of Arc lived that life, and she died abiding by those principles. And that's why I think she is a patroness of our show, and we ask her, St. Joan, pray for us. Bud, this is the uncommon good. We got to let you go. That may Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, reign in our hearts, in our city, our state, our nation, our world, solar system, the entire galaxy. This is the uncommon good. We'll talk to you guys next week.
The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr is heard every week on wonderful Catholic stations like this one, and anytime on podcast. Just search for The Uncommon Good.